Hello again, I'm Des Asante from the TechMuze Academy, and welcome back to episode 70 of the TechMuze podcast. Moving right along, trying to get an episode out every week to keep you entertained and keep you informed. Today's episode is going to be a listener Q&A, so your questions received and hopefully answered. So I'm going to dive right into it. It may be a bit of a shorter episode today than some of the previous posts in the recent past, but hopefully you'll get some meat off the bones and something to take home with you and back to your own studio and your own musical endeavors. Okay, so I'm just going to answer 3, 4, 5 questions, and then we'll move along next week to something else. I got a bunch more guests in the queue, ready to bring on the show and to educate you with their expertise, educate me as well. That's one of the beautiful things about doing this show is I get to bring people on that know things that I don't know, and I get to ask them. And not only do I learn, but of course you learn as well, hopefully in the process. So let's dive into the Q&A. First question comes from Terrence Jenkins. Terrence asks, what are your thoughts about releasing a single that is a cover song? Can I call it a different name as long as I give the artist credit, or should I use the original name? I'm ready to release a single that is a cover, so I look forward to your reply. Okay, so you can certainly release a cover song. People do it all the time. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, if you've done a somewhat unique version of a tune, of a fairly well-known tune, then that may actually get you what I like to refer to as coattail links. So people who are searching for that song may stumble upon your version, and hopefully it impresses them, and you may end up with someone who's now paying attention to you and your music. So there's definitely reasons why you might do it above and beyond just the fact that you like a song. There's some marketing type reasons why you might do it. One thing that you do have to be careful of is getting the proper licensing to use the tune. That's fairly important. You can visit a site like Louder. They deal with that. I'm sure there are other alternatives as well. I'm not affiliated with any of them, so it's best that you do a little bit of research. That's just the first name that comes to my mind. And you can basically purchase a license to use and to sell that track, that cover song on as part of your album or even as a single. There's no problem with that, and it's actually fairly easy to do nowadays. It used to be significantly difficult, but now with services like Louder, they've made easy work out of it. So you want to make sure you've secured the proper license. You don't want that to come back and bite you, especially if it does take off and go a little bit viral, and you know becomes a blip on the radar. You don't want to get bitten for that. And the way it typically works is if you are going to be, say, pressing CDs and you think you're going to sell 1,000 copies, then you would purchase a license for 1,000 copies. And if you end up selling out and want to sell more, you can just simply go back and re-up your license, and you're able to do that again. When it comes to digital downloads, it's a little harder to, it's a little more ambiguous. I'm not an expert in that particular subject, so take my opinion for what it's worth, but these are the things that you want to go out and research. And I would definitely keep the original name. If an artist wrote a song and it has a name, then you want to honor that. You don't have the right to change the name of the song, okay? So hopefully that's helpful. Check out Louder, and I believe it's louder.com. I'll find it and place a link in the description in the show notes. And just make sure you've secured the proper license, and then go for it. Release the cover, and hopefully like I say, hopefully it's an interesting take. It's your perspective on the song as opposed to just a recreation of what the original artist already did. Okay, so hope you find that helpful. Question number 2 comes in from Sahara. Sahara writes in, "Hi Des, I watched your video regarding the mono to stereo input correction for a real instrument and was able to correct my vocal track. But I imported a music track originally in stereo, and that track is coming through as mono only. It does not correct when I change the input setting to mono. I'd love your help on this matter. Thanks so much." So what Sahara is referring to is a video that I released quite a while ago about mono to stereo or stereo to mono tracks in, I believe it was in GarageBand was the example. The problem is that sometimes you'll record a track or even import a track, and you'll hit playback, and the playback is only coming out of one speaker, typically the left speaker. And that's because you've got a mono track, a mono audio source sitting on a stereo track, so it's only receiving input from one channel. You've recorded your vocal, you're plugged into channel 1, but this particular track is actually listening to channels 1 and 2, so 1 being the left side, 2 being the right side. So you can go ahead and convert the track to mono, and that same recording will play back right down the center in mono. Now, if you import a stereo track and it's sitting on a mono track, then it's going to play back in mono as well. You won't get the stereo image, the sounds from the left to the right. So you want to make sure that when you import a stereo source, a stereo audio file, that you drop it on a stereo track. Of course, the converse is also true. If it's a mono track, you want it to be on a mono audio source, you want it to land on a mono track. So it's a real simple mistake to make. Lots of people do it. I get asked about it a bit, which is why I put out the original video. And hopefully that clears things up just a little bit. So if you're recording in mono, in other words, just to clarify, you're recording from only one source, one microphone, one guitar cable, one source. Make sure the track you're recording to is in mono. And if you're importing tracks, whatever the source is, make sure you drop it on a matching track. Mono source, mono track, stereo source, stereo track. Okay? So really simple to fix, real simple problem, mistake to make, and hopefully that clears things up a little bit. Okay, moving right along. Question number 3 comes from Derek. Derek says, Des, I'd like to know, when editing, would you replace drum sounds if a few hits are not played correctly, or would you layer it, rather, to sound better and more uniform? Well, there's no strict, hard and fast rule as far as that type of thing is concerned. Basically, if I've recorded a drummer, and let's say the snare hits are a little bit inconsistent, depending on what the inconsistency is and to what degree, sometimes just something as simple as compression might level out, balance out the dynamics of the snare strokes a little bit and get you to where you want to be. If the discrepancies are a little bit beyond that, maybe something that's fairly common is the drummer goes for a powerful backbeat stroke on the snare but accidentally hits the rim instead. Just a little technical glitch there. Then what you could do is actually grab a snare shot from another spot in the recording, copy it, and place it in the position of the error, right? So that way you're not getting a sample that sounds different than the original recording. You're getting an actual snare sound from the original recording, grabbing a sample of it and placing it, or overlaying it basically on top of the mistake if there was a poor stroke in there somewhere. Okay. Now you can also experiment with sample replacement if you are interested in correcting a production issue. So let's say you recorded the drummer pardon me, and the drummer played an amazing performance, and you don't want to sacrifice that, but as the engineer, maybe you chose a mic that, in retrospect, you didn't like the sound of, or some other such production error. Then what you could do is use sample replacement to reinforce the original sound. So you could take something like Superior Drummer, Easy Drummer, Slate Digitals has some nice products too as far as drums. There's quite a few options to choose from. They're all very respectable these days. And you could use some audio to MIDI type of application. If you're a Cubase user, and I'm assuming other DAWs have this feature as well, but I'm a Cubase user, so I know for sure that if you're a Cubase user, you have audio to MIDI built right into the sample editor. So you can open up your snare drum track, adjust the hit point so that it's detecting all the snare strokes, and then you can say, do me a favor, just spit out a MIDI track that matches the velocity of the strokes, in other words, the amplitude, the loudness, and the timing. And then you can send that to something like Superior Drummer and get a snare track that's an exact duplicate of the original performance, but using sampled sounds. So you could simply replace that original snare track altogether, although you got to be careful because sometimes you get ambience issues. It begins to sound like the snare drum is a separate thing from the rest of the drum kit. What I prefer to do normally is to blend it in alongside the original snare, and that way you maintain a little bit of that homogeneous sound of the entire drum kit. So there's a couple of options. Oftentimes I don't normally entirely replace a microphone signal with the samples. It's happened in the past, but most of the time I like to use what I've got and reinforce it if needed with samples. So hopefully you find that useful, and we'll move along to the next question here. Just got a couple of more. We won't keep it too long today. Question number 4 comes in from Bill McDonald. Bill writes in, "Hello, Des. I was wondering if you could help me out with a situation. I'm looking for a way to separate vocals from the melody in a track. I'd really appreciate it. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Okay, so I assume that what you mean, Bill, and I believe we had some correspondence via email on this question. What you mean is you're trying to remove the vocal from the rest of the music, the bed track that the vocal is sitting in. perhaps for the purposes of a karaoke track, creating a karaoke track, or perhaps you're trying to isolate the vocal and get rid of everything else. Either way, it's going to be a difficult task. There's products out there on the market that claim to do that, to remove the vocal so you get a karaoke track or backing track you can sing over or whatnot. There's all kinds of products out there that claim to do it. I have yet to see one that even comes close to doing a proper job of that. The reason is because once the tune is mixed, you don't have access to the individual tracks anymore. All you have is the regular stereo playback of the whole piece of music. It's very difficult for even the most complex software these days to get in there and isolate just the frequencies that are the vocal from the rest of the track, okay? I mean, maybe if you get into some CIA government forensic type stuff, maybe they've got a tool out there that'll do that, but nothing that I've seen on the market. The closest thing that I've seen is something like Melodyne from a company called Solemnity. Melodyne has the later versions of Melodyne has a feature that's referred to as DNA, which stands for Direct Note Access. And that is actually pretty impressive technology and does have the ability to get in and to some rudimentary degree isolate frequencies in a sound. For example, if I strummed a guitar and recorded it with a single microphone, it could go into that recording and pick out the individual notes of the 6 strings, if I'm playing a chord that involves all 6 strings, of course, and isolate them to their pitches and allow me to manipulate that. So I could take that G major chord and after it's recorded, grab the notes that are necessary and turn it into a G minor chord or turn it into a C chord or anything I want while maintaining the sound of the original recording to a pretty impressive degree, actually. But even with something like that, the complexity of the frequency spectrum inside a stereo mix is going to make it extremely unlikely that you're going to have successful results. If the mix is very sparse, like maybe it's just a piano and a bass and a drum, maybe you could get in there and pick out the vocal notes, the melody notes, but results may vary. So ultimately speaking, Bill, unfortunately no real good way that I can recommend. And if somebody does have a good solution that's proven to work, by all means leave a comment below and let us all know, because unfortunately at the moment, Bill, I got nothing to help you out with that. Okay. Next question comes in from Tony Bailey. Tony says, hey, Des, I really appreciate your blogs and the information is invaluable. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. One thing I would like help with is mixing in mono. I have been mixing this way and I really like the way my mixes have been turning out. However, I'd love to know how you achieve separation in your mixes with EQ and maybe some video examples of it. Okay. Well, of course, inside mixlessons.com, there's all kinds of video examples of exactly how I mix and achieve separation and clarity. In fact, it's a 25-week deep dive into modern in-the-box mixing. So by all means, I encourage everyone to go mixlessons.com and check that out. In fact, the first 4 lecture-style videos are 100% free. Just throw your email in, let me know where to send them. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. But in a nutshell, what Tony's talking about, by the way, about mixing in mono is a technique that a lot of engineers use, myself included, where I like to do a large portion of my static mix on the front end of my workflow without panning anything left or right. So everything is coming straight down the center. In fact, I may even flick the mono switch on my monitor station here, so that even if I have a stereo track, like a keyboard track or something that's recorded in stereo, that everything is collapsed to mono. And the reason I like to do this is because, first off, when everything is in mono and coming straight down the center lane, it's much easier to hear balance issues and frequency conflicts between various instruments. Sometimes if you've got an audio element on the right and an audio element on the left, just the physical separation of them along the panorama, the horizontal spectrum, is enough to disguise the fact that they actually have competing frequencies and they're actually masking each other out to some degree. So when everything's coming straight down the center, it's easy to hear that, oh, these two elements are clashing with one another, and you can pull out your EQ, make some changes to each of the elements so that they play better together. And that's much easier to hear in mono. Also, balance issues. It's easier in mono for me to determine whether or not something is a little too loud or a little too soft. Another thing as far as balance is concerned is always consider mixing at very, very low volume levels. In fact, speech level or perhaps slightly lower. Ideally, you don't have too much ambient sound in your room. That's an issue that I've faced. I mean, we're home studio guys here. I don't have a beautiful setup. This is my studio right here, right? So in some houses and places that I've lived, you know, there'd be ambient noise. There'd be air going through the ducts. There'd be air conditioner, whatever, that you would have to get above, which unfortunately made it impossible to mix at very low levels. So if you don't wrestle with that, then yeah, bring it down, because it's always easier to hear balancing issues at low levels. And it's got to do with the frequency response of the ear and so forth. And I won't get into a science lesson. It's just something you can very, very easily try. Turn the volume down, mix for a while at low levels. It also has the added benefit of not causing your ears to fatigue quite so quickly. Okay, so the reason why I mix in mono are those are the general reasons. And also there's this glorious sensation when you've worked for an hour on a mix and it's in mono and you've got everything balanced nicely. You can hear all the parts clearly. The bottom end is not unruly. Everything is sounding good. You've got you've taken account of the 3 spatial dimensions, the horizontal dimension, the vertical dimension, which is your frequency content, and the depth dimension, which is your reverbs and delays. And then when you begin to pan everything out to the left and right, depending on your strategy and how you choose to approach the particular mix, all of a sudden everything comes to life, and it's really glorious. It's one of my favorite points in my workflow when it comes to a mix. So that's generally how I do it. There's no real hard and fast rules, and these are all just suggestions of things to try that may help you to achieve what you're trying to achieve quicker and with less fatigue and so on and so forth. So hopefully that's helpful to you, Tony, and I appreciate the question. Incidentally, if anyone wants to leave a question, by all means, head over to techmuseacademy.com, and there's a little green icon on the right-hand side of every page. You can actually leave me a voicemail. I much prefer that because I can actually play those on the podcast instead of just reading off my screen here, and that way we get a little variety in the show, okay? So techmuseacademy.com if you do have questions. There's also a contact form there, so if you don't, if you don't have the courage to leave your voicemail, then you can just send me a message via text that way as well. So by all means, feel free to do so, and I'll do the occasional Q&A like this today and answer your questions as best I can. So we're going to wrap it up today with one last question. It's a bit of a long-winded one. I'll do my best not to stumble on my words here, but this comes in from Tommy Fennon. And Tommy writes in, "Hey Des, I attended the webinar. It was very helpful and informative. Incidentally, if you go to mixlessons.com and join the email list there, you'll get an invite the next time the webinars are going on. And so that's the webinar that Tommy's referring to. Okay, he goes on to say, I'm a truck driver, so right now it's difficult to schedule my time to take the course, but in the future I will be taking the course. You have, after watching taking the course that you have. Okay. After watching some of the videos that you have provided over the internet, really put me in the zone that I have struggled with. And that is, where do I really begin with my mixes? Okay. So he's saying that that's what those videos had helped him with. But my major concern, he says, is the placement of my effects when it comes to mixes. This is one of the main concerns I have. Because this is a topic that is never mentioned in all of the readings that I have read or studied on my own, attempting to learn the art of mixing, this is the only holdback I have yet to be resolved. But one difference between you and others that has attempted to provide an absolute vision of the art of mixing is that you have provided a visual approach to the art of mixing. And that, my friend, is what's been missing when it comes to all of the literature that I have studied. Okay. So, well, first of all, Tommy, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you in the members area at Mix Lessons when you're ready to do so. As far as your schedule is concerned, just so you know, and so anyone who's curious knows, because I do get this question a lot, the course is the lessons come out weekly, and once a lesson is added to your account, it never goes away. So if you don't have the time to watch it one day that it comes out, it's going to be there waiting for you. And even if you take a vacation for 2-3 months and come back, all of the lessons that have accumulated will just be right there waiting for you. So that's a non-issue. You don't have to worry about your schedule. As far as your question about the placement of effects, That's a tougher one to answer because, once again, mixing is both a science and an art form. As a science, there are technical sort of rules. There are the laws of physics. There are the physics of acoustics. There's the concept of psychoacoustics and how sound impacts a person psychologically. Those are scientific type things that you can learn and develop. And then on the other hand, there's also the artistic side of mixing, which is where you get to be creative. You get to put your own thumbprint, so to speak, on a mix. You can take a series of tracks recorded well and give those tracks to 10 different mixing engineers, and you're going to get 10 different presentations of those tracks. So there's a great deal of artistic, expressive sort of room in a mix. And so that's why it makes it difficult to say, you know what, this is what you do and you'll be good to go, because that's not always the case. Everyone has different tastes and different goals, okay, for the end result. But there's two things I'll mention. On the one hand, when you're thinking about effects, and when you say effects, I'm going to assume that you mean all of the audio processing tools that we have. The audio comes in one way, and then we manipulate it through effects plugins to go out sounding differently, okay? So let's just assume you mean that in a global sense. The first thing to consider, there's two ways to approach that, sort of two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, there's the scientific approach, which is when I process the audio in such a way, it has this very distinct specific effect that I may be going for. For example, if I'm trying to make an element in my mix sound further away, there are certain processes that I can do based on my knowledge of the physics of acoustics and psychoacoustics, how the listener hears things, how the human auditory system processes things. I can use those techniques and the tools related to them to create that impression that an element is distant from the listener. If I want the element to sound like it's sitting on top of the mix, and so like oftentimes this is the way you would treat a vocal. Again, that's not a rule, you don't have to, but that's a very typical way to process a vocal, is so that it's like a bobber floating on the water, and as the waves go up, the vocal goes up as well, and it just stays out front. Then I can use my tools and my processes in that regard. But then the other side of the coin is what I normally refer to as FX, you know, like the two letters F and X, where I'm using an audio processing tool to create a larger than life effect, you know, like for example, if there's a particular lyric in a vocal recording that I want to emphasize, then I might use a delay throw. This is something I released a video about ages and ages ago. Search for that on YouTube or on TechMuzeAcademy.com. You'll find it if you're curious about the technique, that is. So for example, maybe the word is you, and the vocalist is singing along, and when it gets to that you, I quickly open up a send to a delay, so it goes you, right? So now that's not something that happens in physics, in physical reality. That's something I'm using to be larger than life, to be an effect. So those are the two ways you want to think about it. So one of them is I'm trying to create the illusion of something using my audio processing tools. So I want something to sound far away, close to you, you know, these types of things. I want something to sound like it's in a large room but close to you, or in a large room but far away, or in a small room but close to you, more intimate, right? So that's sort of using the tools from a scientific perspective to recreate or to create the illusion of what you want the listener to experience as far as spatial dimensions are concerned, your sound stage, you could think of it as. And then there's using your processing plugins to accentuate things, to create things larger than life, to really get artistic. You know, if you want something to have a cavernous echo to it, which is above and beyond what you would hear, you know, if a band was playing on stage and the vocalist, you know, would never sound that cavernous, but maybe from an artistic perspective, you want that sound. And again, no rules as far as that goes. So those are the two things you have to consider. So unfortunately, I can't give you specific directives. If you do want to learn more though about using your effects to create psychoacoustic illusions of space and soundstage, then definitely I encourage you to head over to mixlessons.com and grab the free course. Just throw your email in, tell my systems where to send the information, and you'll get the first video right away, because we do cover that. We talk about the three spatial dimensions and how they're dealt with as far as your processing plugins, okay? But above and beyond that, You got to get creative. You got to let your ear be the judge. Okay. So Tommy, I appreciate the question. Thanks to everyone who submitted a question. If you do want to ask a question, once again, head over to techmuseacademy.com. You'll find everything you need there, including some pretty cool content, if I do say so myself. And if you are interested in digging deeper into mixing, mixlessons.com is the place to do that. And if you are interested in digging a little deeper into artist promotion and music marketing, then artistpromotionblueprint.com is the place for that. Okay. And keep making music. I will see you next week.